Absolutely. Again, Pat, at this point, it is a pursuit, and unfortunately, it has a lot of mitigating circumstances because of the high profile of the proposed suspect that's inside the vehicle, which could possibly be and appears to be at this time O.J. Simpson.
On June 17th, 1994, network news stations in the United States began airing a car chase. It featured a white Ford Bronco, and it was being operated by Al Cowling, a former NFL player. In the back seat was Orenthal James Simpson, O.J. Simpson. He had been charged with the murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her boyfriend, Ronald Goldman. 97 million Americans would tune in to watch these events unfold. Let's face it, we're all a little obsessed when it comes to crime, particularly when we start to look at the way it appears in the media that we consume on a daily basis. Our focus this semester is on the role of the internet in shaping the way people understand, perceive, and experience crime. And so with that in mind, I think it's important to start off with a conversation about why we study the media itself. After all, crime is a terrible thing. Crime is fear, crime is terror, crime is death. Yet we're obsessed with watching it in our media. Our popular television shows, our blockbuster movies, and many of the other forms of media that we enjoy, they all include some element of crime and criminality. Think about the biggest movies that you've seen in the last decade. How many of those are about crime or feature some level of crime within them? You would think that with the amount of fear that we feel about crime, we'd want to avoid it at all costs, but rather it appears that we're drawn to it. And so in this video, I'm going to briefly go over a few different reasons as to why we might be so obsessed with watching crime in the various forms of media that we enjoy. After that, I'll have a short discussion about why it's important that we study media portrayals of crime through a criminological lens. One of the first ideas that I have as to why we're so obsessed with seeing crime in the media is our voyeuristic tendencies. Now, let's not mistake this with the DSM-V definition of voyeurism, which is really about sexual gratification from watching unobserved people. Rather, in the more generalistic approach, voyeurism is really about looking at or observing people without them being aware, seeing things that we wouldn't normally see, and getting some level of gratification from them. When we look at film and how crime has transpired in it, we see that whether it's through comedic effect, such as the film Catch Me As You Can, starring Tom Hanks, the dramatic representation of crime, like the Zodiac Killer films that came out a couple of years ago, or the downright bizarre, like The Wolf of Wall Street. In all of those, what we get is an opportunity to view crime as it transpires from multiple different lenses, without the protagonists ever really knowing that we're watching them. Media outlets have long been aware of our voyeuristic tendencies. For example, in the 1930s and 1940s, a photographer of the name Arthur Felig, who generally went by the pseudonym Ouija, was made famous for taking pictures of crimes as they were occurring on the streets of New York. Miles Orwell, a contemporary historian who has studied Ouija's work, argues that Ouija was an artist, however, not somebody that we might consider an elite artist. Rather, he argues he was a kind of urban primitive, an innocent, a night prowler, an observer who became identified with his subjects, and his subjects being crime and despair. Now, when you think about that statement, certainly you can see some connections with the voyeuristic ideas. Another hypothesis as to why we're so prone to enjoying crime in the media could be that humans seek a vicarious connection to fear and risk-taking. Certainly, we enjoy the dopamine effect that comes from a good jump scare or a scary movie? Could this also transfer over to the way we enjoy television and general depictions of crime? A 2020 paper published in the Journal of Evolutionary Behavioral Sciences seems to confirm this supposition. Authors Mattia Klassen, Jens Kjeldgaard Christensen, and John A. Johnson conducted an analysis of individuals who enjoyed watching horror films and frightening movies. One of the most interesting findings from their study is that people tend to seek out the media that is going to resonate most closely with their identity or their personality. And in particular, they like to look at media that seems plausible. Moreover, the authors noticed that people experienced intellectual stimulation and experienced both positive and negative emotions from consuming horror and violent media, concluding that individuals brave the initially aversive response to simulate threats and so enter a positive feedback loop by which they attain adaptive mastery through coping with virtual simulated danger. A third and far more critical perspective suggests that our obsession with crime in the media may relate to the big what if question. That is to say, what if I acted differently? Now, as you might imagine, in Western democratic societies like Canada and the United States of America, we tend to be dominated by a series of laws and rules that are intended to shape our behaviors, by both prohibiting certain actions and also obliging us to take other actions. As we go through our daily lives, we are bombarded by these rules and obligations. And as such, there's inevitably going to be a moment or two where we question, what would happen if I disobeyed the rules? The criminalistic media can often give us some insights into the answer to that what if question. In some cases, it demonstrates that crime pays. For example, the 1969 film The Italian Job features a cast of misfits who manage to rob a significant amount of gold from a bank and make their escape. On the other hand, some films depict the fact that crime actually doesn't pay. For example, in 2007's No Country for Old Men, the protagonist locates a suitcase full of stolen money, and throughout the rest of the movie is tracked down by a ruthless killer who ultimately gets his way. So, the media can often confirm our suppositions about morality, but also give us some insight into the potential benefits that come from breaking these rules. It often depends on the framing that is presented, an important concept that we're going to talk about in class. The final perspective that I want you to consider comes from a philosophical school of thought that was popularized by Ulrich Beck at the beginning of the 21st century. While Beck's writing is somewhat dense and difficult to digest, something that I won't force you to do this semester, it does point out the importance of a concept he refers to as manufactured risks. These are risks or harms that are produced through human activity, ranging from environmental impacts to far more insidious events like acts of terror. Given that these risks are of human production, they lead to a sort of introspective reflection, which is often undertaken by individuals who seek to identify the cause of these risks and, more importantly, the processes that let them mitigate risks. In a general sense, then, Beck's argument is that we have become a society obsessed with mitigating risk, with identifying the things that could harm us as individuals or as a society, and trying to quash them before they can occur. Beck's perspective then can give us some insight as to why crime is so commonly occurring in our media. Regardless of the reasoning, we are fascinated by crime and wrongdoing. And this fascination is reflected in the media that we consume. Whether it's graphic depictions of the crimes of Jack the Ripper in 1888, or the rampant complaints about an inactive president in 2021, we see crime present in much of the news and information that we consume on a daily basis. This sensationalism has transpired across countless media forms, communicating with the reader or the viewer the facts about singular crimes, their trends, and the risk that they pose to us. What does this all mean for criminology? How should we handle it? Is it a given? That being said, we cannot undervalue the media, both for its presence in our society and also for its significance as a conveyor of knowledge. It brings us images of our greatest tragedies, their impact, and it helps us to find resolution. And also shares with us our triumphs with an ever-present, inward-facing critique. It takes on multiple forms, but we must be cautious of its limits and its frames. Bearing in mind the value of influence and ultimately profit, we are subject to the selectivity and biases of those who aggregate, edit, and omit stories. For example, over the summer of 2019, much of Canada was enraptured by the story of Cam McLeod and Briar Schmigelski, two teens who ran rampant in northern Canada. Yet at the same time, the media almost completely ignored the Assaye hotel bombing that occurred in Kismayo, Somalia, which was perpetrated by Al-Shabaab and killed 26 people.